Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to this conversation on building collective power, also an alternative form of power than what we're probably used to. We'll be your hosts. I'm Paula Qualitza.
And I'm Samita Manhas.
Are we going to do it in unison? And
what do we say? And we're on the Groundswell team.
We're part of the Groundswell team. Groundswell is an alternative business school. So we are located on the stolen and occupied shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And recently, the team took part of a workshop led by Tatalia Michelle Nahani of the Squamish Nation, who invited us to state where we are and whose land we are on with more heart and thoughtfulness, and for that to come from our personal relationship to the land. So in reflecting a bit on my own relationship with the land, one sort of image or experience I often think about is traveling the highway, a highway that I traveled often as a kid from the suburbs of Vancouver to the forests and rivers of the Entallkapam territories in the Cascade Mountains, where I really found myself in relationship with big trees and squirrels and cold creeks, and then back again down that highway to the suburban backyard and the adjacent city of Vancouver. And that journey through space makes me think about the journey through time that this place has been through over the last 200 years or so, when those forests and creeks were here in what is now a city and what we now call Vancouver, before European colonizers came and violently imposed their culture and beliefs onto the land and onto the lives of the people who lived here. So now we have tall buildings instead of tall trees, systems that uphold oppressive power over others, that don't honor unique gifts of each individual, that don't enable us or work against enabling us to collectively take action together towards caring for each other and the land. And I think since that happened so quickly, if we think about just 200 years ago, if you're in this part of the world and look out your window, this place looked so different. And the systems that are in place and the culture that is dominant now is so different than what used to be. It really gives me hope that things will change again. And change is definitely the only constant, that things will be different and that we are actively doing the work now to bring about that change by practicing power in different, more collective ways. And to give you a little bit more context as to where Groundswell is in the city of Vancouver, we're part of the Chinatown and downtown Eastside neighborhoods of this place. And there are so many different communities who share this part of the city, and we are always learning from them and learning from local movements for decolonization and social justice that these communities are leading, often through collective power, what we're here to talk about today. And we're also grateful for the ancestors of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people for taking care of this land since time immemorial. So when we kind of gaze beyond the skyscrapers, and it's a little bit easier to remember when we see the mountains and the trees, that we can learn from the water, the mountains, the trees, the animals, and all of our non-human kin of how to work together and live together. So I want to express gratitude for those ancestors and for the people currently doing the work in those nations to teach us and lead by example. All right, we can get into a bit of a nitty-gritty of the event tonight.
Thanks for sharing that, Paula.
Yeah.
I'll take us through a few housekeeping things before we get started and before you meet our panelists. So we had sent out an email just saying, usually in our in-person events, we'd like to create like a full experience for people in terms of different sounds or food or different things that we have present for you. But unfortunately, we can't do all those. We can't make it fully multi-sensory for you. So we urge you to have those things around you, things that bring you comfort or things that activate your sense of unlearning or learning. Here at Groundswell, we like to surround ourselves with a few different things. Somebody mentioned our pillow. We got a feelings wheel pillow back there. We have different scents. So we have a spray here that Paula's brought in. We like to have drinks. We usually have various chips. We usually have various drinks on the table. This is probably the least we amount here. Usually we have like pop, but we have juice and we have
You're reminding me I need to get my tea, which is over there.
Yeah, tea. We usually have a lot of different things just to ground ourselves and have access to all the things that we need. So hope you can do that for yourself. And another thing, so this is set up as a webinar. So you can, if you have a question for either us, the team, or the panelists, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section. So you can type in your question there. If it is going to the panelists and you wish for it to be anonymous, you can say that as well. And the chat is also open, so we see a lot of you already interacting in there. And we just a reminder to be compassionate to each other, and we all have different lived experiences, and that means we can show up differently. So just be mindful of how we talk to one another in the chat. And the last thing is that we do have closed captioning tonight for this event. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see, it'll say CC live transcript. So you can click on that. There's also an option to, once you click on that, I believe you can see full transcript. So what that'll do is like on the side panel, it'll show you the full transcript of the captioning. So if you miss anything, you can scroll up and read that. So I think that's it for housekeeping.
Yes. Now I would like to invite our special guests to put their videos on so we can see you, and also figure out how we can hide the non-video screens, so you don't have to look at Samita and my boxes. So I'd like to introduce first Tinthi Tembo, who's joining us today as one of our special guests. Tinthi was introduced to us by Samita, actually, who met her related to her work with Culture Days. So Tinthi supports artists, in particular Black and Indigenous and artists and people of color, with her work with Culture Days, which was a big event that took place on July 1st, I guess 2019, 2018. Okay, this is why I don't go too much into detail. You can speak for yourself, Tinthi. And also recently founded BIPOC CA, which is an organization that supports Black artists and Indigenous artists and in making a livelihood from their very important work. So thanks for joining us, Tinthi. And then we have Nura Ali, who is joining us from Alberta, Treaty 7 territory tonight. And I'm glad we figured out the timing for this, so we're all here at the same time. And we met Nura last May when Groundswell delivered a workshop at an Emily Carr residency program with arts grads. So we are very happy to have you joining us here. And Emily Dundas Oke is our third special guest this evening, who we met through Groundswell's favorite bookstore, Massey Books, which is an Indigenous-owned bookstore on Georgia Street, about half a block away from where we are sitting right now at Groundswell. And the reason we reached out to these folks, we are very grateful to have them here, is because they're really doing the work that Groundswell is trying to cultivate with our students. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Groundswell is an alternative business school for people who want to change the future of work for themselves and for the communities that they're a part of. So we run courses and workshops that challenge our relationship with work, something we may not think about so much, but our relationship with work is often wrapped up in those harmful systems that influence how we relate to the world, systems of white supremacy, of colonialization, and a whole bunch of other isms that we will touch on tonight, capitalism, et cetera, and we want to create alternative ways of working that are aligned with our values and with what really matters. So this work at Groundswell has been led by Vidya Crawley, who is our CEO. And although they can't be here tonight, we'd like to introduce Vidya to you, as she's the thoughtful and brilliant mind behind much of the education and the curriculum that we do at Groundswell. And also through leading the rest of the team, Samita and I, in our collective work in addressing things like power and alternative ways of working through our courses. So let's get a little bit more into why we are talking about collective power.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, I was just making sure everybody could see the video. I misread a message in the chat. Okay, so yeah, today we're going to be talking about building collective power. And this is a conversation that we've been having at Groundswell for a very long time with a lot of our alumni, as well as within our Leadership for Social Change course, which is a 4-week course that we do here at Groundswell. And we talk about different types of power. So we're talking about how the current systems, like the colonial systems that we live under, are built around having power over other people, and having power over people, land, resources. And there are other forms of power that exist that are not often talked about. And one of those forms of power is power with, so collectivizing with other people. There's that form of power exists in the world today, and people are using it in different ways, so including our panelists tonight. So we wanted to highlight that. And yeah, I think we're gonna get started. We're gonna put some definitions of power into the chat so you can have a look at that. And try to, we urge you to try to identify the different forms of power as folks are speaking. Just a way to start recognizing that we can, as Paula mentioned, we can have a different system in place. The current one hasn't existed that long, and we need to start learning to recognize these other forms. So that's what we'll start to do.
All right, and about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the event, we're going to be sharing a crowdsourced collage, essentially a Google slide deck that is going to be available for everyone here to edit. So we can add some of our inspiration for collectivism, collective power, power with others. We'll have some of the music from tonight on this. We'll have a book list shared and some books on there, as well as some images that are inspiring to us. And you'll also get to read a little bit more about our guests on that. So speaking of our guests, let's get to it. We'd love for you each to introduce yourselves a little deeper, tell us what you want us to know about you. And we are curious to hear your perspective, starting wherever you'd like to start, with the concept of collectivism and collective power. And tell us what does that feel like to you, or taste like, or smell like, sound like, look like? What does collective power or collectivism, what is it to you? So we will start in, actually we didn't decide this. How would I just let you, whoever feels inspired to go first, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, go ahead and introduce yourselves a little more.
I'll go
first.
Also, just great. So I don't sound, don't look rude more than anything. I just wanted to first say I've decided to bead. So if I'm looking down or like look like I'm disengaged, it's actually because I'm quite engaged, but just need to look away. So that, yeah, I just wanted to get that out in the air first, Tinthi. My name's Emily. Thank you to Groundswell, to Paula and Samita for all of your work in organizing this event and thinking through so much and quite beautifully how you can care for us as panelists in this event. I so appreciate kind of the space and the time and the thought that's been put into bringing us all together. And thank you, Tinthi and Nura, for being in conversation once again. It's so nice to see you again and meet you and learn from you. So as was mentioned, I work with Massey Books, which is an Indigenous-owned bookstore just down the street from Groundswell. And similarly have been prompted to kind of identify myself personally when speaking kind of in these territories, as a way to sort of introduce myself to these territories and kind of set hopefully a good tone and a good way forward. So I'm a Nehiyaw, Métis, and Scottish person. Right now I'm a curator and an editor, but those are just, I think, titles really. And so I've been living in these territories and near these waters for almost 3 years now. And I came to this area because I wanted to learn from and artistic practices and learn how I might support them. And I found within this community, huge amounts of generosity with that sharing and kind of mentoring kind of built into everyday practices. And I've actually been really stumbled about this question of collective power since you, I kind of posed it to us as you made the introduction to the event, because perhaps because my mind made some assumptions around collective as in like many people, or collective as in like being together. And I think that, you know, ways in which we show up for each other in person and on the ground are really vital. I was thinking about, you know, where I draw my strength, or where I feel in moments of like collective action, oftentimes I feel both very powerful, but maybe also like overwhelmed with everything else going on. And I found just today before our meeting, I was cleaning my car and talking to somebody in my personal life on the phone, and not to like divulge too much of someone else's story, but somebody I'm close to has recently taken on a new role as a grandmother, and somebody who might not have always had access to a language, an ancestral language. And in becoming a grandmother, I've seen them really take on words of their own language to identify themselves as a kokum. And in preparing for this talk, I was like, that's what makes me feel maybe close to this term of collective power. I do have to say, Tinthi, last week when we met, I think you sort of challenged us to think about power as maybe a term that we should trouble, because it means you can have power over somebody. And I think for myself, I'm thinking more of security. And in that moment of, you know, having this person identify as a kokum, I thought, oh, it's because they're thinking of their future. The future gave them this kind of ownership. They're caring for this new person in the world, and that new person gave them the comfort to take this word. And then it kind of made me think backwards to my own ancestors, and it's what they have done to make me feel safe with certain things. And so I think you know, in collective power, perhaps as a certainty, or that the future can feel that it's taken care of. That's kind of where I've come to before this talk, but I'm so excited to have to see where else it takes me this evening.
There's so much there in what you said. Thank you so much for that story. And I think like the concept of grandmothers and family is such an obvious thing to bring into this conversation. So thank you for going there. Right, who's next?
I don't mind. Yeah, I don't mind. Hi, I'm Tinthi. I'm just going to let everyone know that the H is silent. So it's just silent. So basically, yeah, I definitely want to situate myself as a guest on these lands, and specifically as someone that's Indigenous to the lands of elsewhere. I have great respect and absolute gratitude for being welcomed here graciously on, you know, lands that have not been sovereignly gained. So it's very important to highlight that my deepest thanks goes to the people of this land. Yeah, a bit about my background. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I've been residing in so-called Canada for about 12 years now. And I really I mean, when people talk about culture shock, I really understand that phrase now. Like, there is a completely different culture happening in the Northern Hemisphere, the Western world, that I still to this day cannot comprehend. Like, you know, people would argue, well, you've lived there for so long, you're basically from there. No, I'm not actually. My founding principles are completely opposite of what people were raised on here. And so that never can leave me, nor will it. And so I guess it shapes everything I do in life because community has always been at the forefront of all of my conversations. I do come from a collectivist society, so in understanding, like, going from we to I was a huge shift, and that was my culture shock, was shifting from we to I. And so that's why I struggle to comprehend it. I don't know individualism the same way someone who grew up here from like infancy does. So for me, the word Ubuntu really is what collective power means to me. And it was so innate to my upbringing. So I thought everyone in the world was like that and that we all cared for each other. But I came to learn that this was a philosophical term of African descent. So it's really lovely to be here, to be able to engage in dialogue and share some of the perspective of the fact that there is more than what meets the eye. It's just a matter of listening to people who do come from different upbringings and like cultural understandings that aren't toppled by capitalism quite as drastically as society is affected here. So yeah, aside from that long-winded answer, yes, I am one of the co-founders of BIPOC-CA, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color Creative Association. It birthed from a protest that we held last year on July 1st. And it was really the fact that I can't handle that Queen Elizabeth is the constitutional monarch of this land. It doesn't make sense to me. So I was just really having trouble with this idea of Canada Day and what does that even mean. So for me, I wanted to give thanks to those who actually have had time on this land for time immemorial. So that was the driving force of what brought Culture Day on, was just acknowledging the existence and focusing on celebrating the voices of those that came much before us. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I guess I'll just leave it there for now.
We'll have plenty more time to chat more and tease out some of these concepts. Thanks, Tinthi. I'll pronounce your name correctly. Thanks for that.
It's hard to follow those two wonderful introductions. I always really struggle with this introductory phase because it's like, how do you begin to encapsulate yourself as a person? Do you go into that, professional speak and do your elevator pitch about, the practice that you do, or do you share something that is about you as a person? So I think I'm going to do like a tiny bit of both and like not commit to either of those options. So I'm also, I think that Paula, you mentioned that I'm situated on Treaty 7 territory, which is the Blackfoot Nation, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And as somebody who hasn't grown up in Canada and has only been here for almost a decade now, wow, that's, I don't know, it's like, wow. I think a lot about what it means to be somebody who is benefiting from the continued occupation of this land, and what it means to come into a place where I am the direct recipient of this long lineage of exploitation, oppression, and violent genocide. And then what it means to hold all that history, but also begin to imagine what else there could be. You know, what else can we imagine for our future, knowing the history that has come before us, but what alternatives might be presented to us if we, you know, honor Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous worldviews, and what happens if we actually learn from, you know, the ancestors of this land? What happens if we go back to the people who knew better? And so I've been trying to wrestle with all of that and sit with the discomfort of, you know, being somebody who is at the receiving end of a lot of these privileges that are directly linked to all of these exploitative histories. And yeah, it's not a comfortable position to be in, but I think that it's an important one. And I think that's also, I too came from a very collective based society, and this idea of individualism is just not how I was brought up, and it's something that I have been in turns wrestling with, especially when it comes to how I would like to view both my practice and how I want to be as a human walking around in the world. And I think that for me, when I'm thinking about this idea of collective power, it kind of, instead of it being tied to power, for me, it's more tied to responsibility. And I think that for me, collectivism is about responsibility. It's about knowing that you have responsibility to others, and that others reciprocally have a responsibility to you. And so for me, when I think about others, it's not just reserved for human beings, that there is others that are non-humans as well, and that we have that same sense of responsibility to others as we do to humans. So I think that's definitely a big part of how I think about collectivity, and when I think about even about power, it's all based in what we owe to each other, and knowing that we are owing things to others. So that's me.
Thanks, Nura. I love all the definitions that are being redefined, that you're all defining and redefining. We had a dinner party together virtually last week, which was really fun, which a lot of the questions that we're going to pose to you tonight are going to come from that conversation. And also we will encourage you to like tap back into that dinner party vibe and feel free to like ask each other questions, or and we'll also have sort of a set time when we'll kind of turn it over to you. But yeah, I just wanted to bring us back a little bit to our dinner party last week, because yeah, I'm starting to sense that vibe coming back a little bit with the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and one of the things that we did talk about is some of the obstacles when it comes to like building that collective power, or Nura, you mentioned like it's like that reframing of like that responsibility piece, and Tinthi, you mentioned like individualism, how that plays into North American or the colonial culture that we live with here. But can you share like a personal experience or things that have occurred for you that felt blocked building collective power with someone else or with a group?
Yeah, definitely. I was just kind of taking that in for a sec. Well, honestly, okay. Like where the story starts is often the biggest challenge for me in terms of having difficulty connecting to those around, because I think that something that's often overshadowed when engaging in like peeling away and understanding, like going through self-discovery, is that oftentimes within the colonial context, you're discovering self on your own versus discovering self within community. Because something that Ubuntu really recognizes, so in Ubuntu is basically a philosophy which says that I am because we all are. So, you know, it goes beyond the categorizations and classifications that colonial systems and structures have bestowed and imposed upon us, because it's just seeing any life as being valuable. And similar to what Nura said, is that there's a responsibility and a duty that you have towards that life. And especially when it comes to human life, I did not learn how to be human without learning from another human. So I think because that's not the foundation around here, that everyone thinks that they are who they are because of what they are capable of doing, and they take the onus and say, you know, it's a very selfish, egotistical outlook. You are who you are because you did this on your own and you worked hard for it. Like, that's really sad for me. Like, when I reflect on that, I'm like, wow, that sounds extremely lonely. And what does that do for you to view the world in that way? Because there's a constant sense of emptiness. So I think it's this kind of work has to focus on redirecting your focal points and your focal practices, starting from, they have to stem from love, rather than being reduced to doing something that has to be done from a sense of guilt or obligation. Like, that's what capitalism does, you know, it feeds on the emptiness. And so that emptiness comes into how you engage with others, because when you meet someone, you're just looking at them as at what you can get from them. How are they going to benefit you? Are they worth your time to speak to? Like, that is horrendous. Now that you're in a situation where we're literally banned from speaking to each other, are the feelings the same? Are you still as stoked to have spent 2 minutes talking to someone and getting something out of them, even though you physically can't see them? Like, that's a lot to reconsider. And I mean, that's just a geographical standpoint, but that's like what's being encouraged through that outlook of fulfilling obligations. So yeah, definitely I would say refocusing the focal points and practices are what are really important, and what I encourage in just how I engage with folks. It's more focused on like discussing, everyone's going through different things, but I think I pose a lot of focus on the different perspectives, because there are similarities in what folks go through, but they're happening differently. And that perspective always like helps you clue in and feel that connection with someone. And it's just engage. You don't even have to speak with them. It's a matter of like the body language, your senses. Like you get a whiff of someone, you get a smell of, you know, a scent of their smell, and it reminds you of something earlier in your life. You've instantly connected with that person. And that's so beautiful. Like, then you move on to the next person. You might, well, this is pre-COVID, by the way, but like still, hopefully you can get some sense coming through with the breeze. But you know what I'm saying? It's just like that whole thing, that interaction, the way our bodies speak a language, like even social distancing has shown me how much humans are we're such social animals. And you can tell, like, tell us to be 2 meters apart, and you find someone in the grocery shop is stepping towards you. You're shifting back. They're like moving closer. Why? I don't know you, but they're feeling that connection. The heat and the electrons are bringing you closer together. So I think it's just, I like focusing on those elements more, because it helps the mind break down that whole idea of you experiencing this and this on your own, and really helps you focus more on like actually feeling what the person next to you might be feeling, because you could go through that and that could hurt you in the same way or make you feel happy in the same way. You just want to feel what they're feeling, you know?
I love that contrast with the like the intellectualization of like someone else's experience versus tapping into our senses to connect. It's almost like our senses as a shortcut to connection. The way you described it.
And I felt like as you were speaking, like I was, you know, in my mind going through various experiences I've had where I've connected with people, and like you mentioned, like the scent or certain things that remind you of different interactions. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. You worded that really well. Somebody said in the chat too that the way you spoke, that was just wonderful. Yeah. Anyone else want to share?
So I could share a little bit. Yeah, I think that collectivism and community is something that I think about a lot. And aside from having collectivism be a big part of my artistic practice, I was also fortunate enough to be one of the founding members of the Vancouver Artist Labor Union. And so it's this unionized cooperative and artist union, and it, you know, tries to fight a lot of the exploitative practices that impact artists in particular, and not just artists in general, but there's like a growing movement of art institutions having unions, and you know, artists that are part of those institutions becoming unionized, but there's a huge gap for a lot of other artists that are freelance or might be working for multiple institutions. And so it's much harder for them to also get the benefits of collective action and you know, collective bargaining and to be able to fight for their rights. And so our union specializes in, you know, trying to provide those same benefits for artists that are more freelance and you know, don't have a centralized workplace to unionize around. And so for us, like the need for the union is very obvious, because you know, the industry that we're in, unfortunately, is very, very exploitative. And I mean, it's one of the least regulated industries in the entire world, and it's still something that is very much the power disparities are very stark, and it leaves a lot of artists open to being, you know, exploited, not being paid for their work, and all kinds of other issues. And on top of, you know, like the regular issues that regular workers face. So the need for the union was very obvious, but when we were trying to set up a union, we know that there is also a history within the unions and the history of unions, that they're not necessarily a place that is free of exploitation or free of the other structures that are problematic, you know. And like, you know, I don't know if you guys know too much about the history of unions, but they didn't start from a sort of like an egalitarian position. You know, they started as a protectionist endeavor. You know, they were started as, you know, like from guilds to be protecting certain workers having their jobs taken over by newcomers. And so when we think about that aspect of things and how also there's, you know, sort of like a twin history of unions being both fighting for workers, but then also being, you know, sites for all kinds of different racism, sexism, homophobia, like all these other things. We were like, just because we're starting a union doesn't mean that we can just assume that we're going to be doing things well. And so we were trying to, at every single stage, be completely thoughtful about the things that we were doing and the choices that we were making. So at every stage, we were questioning all of these, you know, supremacies that we all just take for granted as de facto ways of organizing an organization. And being really like mindful about whether or not this was something that was replicating a harm or something that was actually challenging it. And in that process of going through trying to create this organization that is actually really trying to be thoughtfully anti-supremacist in all the supremacies, it's actually really hard. It's actually really tricky to do that. That's not something that even all of us together as people who hold these values as true to ourselves, it was still really incredibly difficult. And so I think about that a lot in terms of how, when we think about collectivism, that there is this assumption that just because if you get a bunch of good people together, good things will happen. And I'm now realizing that that's not the case at all, and that we have to be so much more intentional in all of our endeavors and all of our choices. And like, for example, we decided that we had to have a 50% BIPOC board minimum. And that was a choice that we had to make because we were like, you know, thinking that if we just left it open, thinking that we were a bunch of good people coming together, that would naturally happen. Nothing happens naturally. Our natural default for all of us is, you know, cis, heteropatriarchal, white supremacist. You know, that's our default for everybody. So if we don't want that to be the default, we have to be so much more explicit about what we're doing and be much more not just thoughtful, but name it and say it and make it as like, you know, this is our basic minimum. This is our baseline that we're going to do. And even in terms of like collective power, you know, the basic structure is like the board and then the general population of the organization. The board makes all the decisions, and then the general population has, you know, kind of no say in it. They just put up with it or don't. And we flip that around. And so now all of the decisions that are the big decisions are made in the General Assembly as opposed to being made by the board. And so all of these things are things that we're thinking about. Just because that's how things are done doesn't mean to say that that's how we need to do them. And so, yeah, I realized that coming to a position of like, how do we challenge what is our assumed power differentials? How do we make choices that actually result in horizontal power rather than those like top-down structures? And it's not easy. Is the short answer.
Yeah, that sounds like such such a huge challenge, Nura. Yeah, I obviously wasn't involved in the creation of the union, but so admire the work and like so really feel the urgency and necessity of it, and what you've done with the group and the union. Yeah, kind of two things, but two related things come to mind as both of you were speaking, and I think Tinthi, or Tinthi, sorry. So I want to apologize for mispronouncing your name, first of all. But what you're saying about, you know, even despite COVID, the need to like have a body and to respond with that body to another's, I think is really really felt at this time, and also kind of with the pervasiveness of the systems that you've identified, and I think that will continue to identify throughout the evening, such as like insidious and kind of ever-present capitalism, is that oftentimes we don't, we might be in a position where we don't feel like we have another body responding to us, so feeling very much like alone in certain actions. And I think very much of how and I think what the hosts are trying to kind of accomplish today by making this multi-sensory is by kind of acknowledging what and the need for our body to carry those teachings or those responses like with us, and how that becomes kind of a necessary survival tool, is just like the wisdom of our own bodies. I've felt that very much in, you know, hostile environments where there might not be someone present in the room with me who's a mentor or somebody who you know, is mindful of safety or otherwise, but that I need to like keep their presence with me in a way, and kind of carry that through my body. I have a really hard time kind of verbalizing this, and that's kind of where the area in which like my art takes its form, because I was like, I can't really find a way to speak about this, so I'm trying my best tonight. Oh, I had another thing, but now it's slipped. Yeah, and oh, back to Nura, what you were saying about kind of the pervasiveness of these structures despite best attempts to identify and undo them. And it's I think, yeah, at least my own lived experience, particularly in like highly structured environments, predominantly work environments, but also in social environments outside of work. I think it's I guess that this is, both of these points are just a move to like interiority, to back to ourselves and inside ourselves, because I've also seen how despite like cognitive or maybe an outward like verbalization of like we need to undo these powers structures or otherwise, just how easily they seep into our own bodies, and that we reify them ourselves. I've certainly felt that way when, you know, I might be low on like a work you know, ladder or something, and seeing that the structure isn't explicit, nobody is telling us we need to do it in these harmful ways, but there's an assumption of how things are done, and that those with best intentions, often myself included, don't put the time into questioning them and to realize just how easy some of these really harmful practices can be tossed out the window through daily acts, but that the hard part is making sure that all of them are done, tossed out the window, and done so kind of forever and sustainably. So I guess, yeah, for me, I'm like, let's just go, like, let's back to our bodies, both in carrying these forwards, and also kind of hardening to not let those these very learned behaviors kind of continue on.
Yeah, I think I want to add one more point to your point. That's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, is, you know, this idea that despite our best intentions, that we might also be falling prey to a lot of these learned oppressive systems, and how as a community can we both hold ourselves to higher standards and try to aim for better than something that we know is not working, but then also to recognize what to do when somebody fails in doing that, when somebody makes a mistake, or when somebody is that when somebody slips back into those ways of being. And I think that for me, this idea of collective power and collectivism in general, it requires so much trust at its foundational core. I think that collectivism doesn't exist without a huge amount of trust in the people that you are being in commune with, that you are in community with. And I think that for me, something that I'm trying to sort of like unpick recently is this idea of how do we as a community not try to replicate the same things that don't work, these exploitative systems, but then care for people who make a mistake and try to realize that we can still have people within our community who are terrible, you know. And I think that there's a you know, I think that because like this is something that I was talking the other day with my sister about, where when it comes to, say, for example, your family, there's so much license given to the people in your life that you just assume are just going to be there forever. You know, there's whether or not you wanted them, they're just part of your family, and there's no way of getting rid of them. And there is a whole host of different conversations that happen when somebody makes a mistake in that environment, when, you know, somebody is thoughtless towards you or hurts you or does these things. And not to say that there aren't times when your family is that relationship is untenable and that it's too poisonous to you that you can't maintain those connections. But we were just talking about this idea of how when we sort of lock ourselves into this idea of perfection or nothing, it doesn't leave a lot of room in the middle for just being a human being that does sometimes get it wrong. And so I think that the way that I'm trying to sort of think through this for myself, because there's been like a personal incident that's made me really sort of like try to ruminate on what this means. And I think that there is a lot more gray area than this sort of like 24-hour news cycle and internet culture is giving us. That it's not to say that somebody who is repetitively harmful and is actually, you know, a source of harm, real true harm for other people should be maintained, but that there is other people who are not like that, but are being treated like that too. And so I'm trying to figure out ways how, when we think about collective power, how do we think about what do we do when somebody doesn't behave perfectly?
You see, now I think that's the misconception of what collective power is about. And you see, that's why the word power is also problematic. I find semantics are very important when it comes to dismantling the structures that uphold and keep us in prison-like states, because from everything you just said, like one of the biggest issues, so we're talking multisensory reactions, the term white supremacist, the word supreme, the origin supreme, just instigate right then and there that white people are still above all, even in discussing all the torment, all the demonizing, the dehumanizing. The word supremacist still upholds that power. And the people coming up with the terminology to discuss this very issue tend to be the very people causing the issue, you know? So I find even in the work that I do, coming up with different language to talk about being someone who lives with dignity without having to dig into words like you're fighting for your right to have personhood in the language you're trying to use to describe who you really are. It like we really have to just focus on how we're talking about all of this, because within itself, it disbands us even further, the dialogue in which we engage in, because of the structure of it. Like for me, like once I never liked the term, and it was Elder Kat Norris who really brought it up at the land acknowledgement at Culture Day. And she was like, you know, you really need to stop using that word, because you're really allowing yourself to be taken over even further by just releasing those words from your mouth. Because in that moment when you say it, there's a sense of belief that, like, that subconscious labor that your brain's going through, that then internalizes other things further, and that you have to work harder to overcome because of the language that continuously reinforces that divide. So I find that, you know, like Westerners specifically, and everywhere in the world has been impacted by this, but the competition is at such a high level here for so many centuries that it's hard for, like, the knowledge bearers, different indigenous communities who are like so connected to the land, you know, have different perspectives, because in Western thinking, we 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 come to the idea that we control the environment, even though that's like completely, that's not even a thought we can comprehend. Like, technology makes people believe that we can control the environment, but pre-technology, you know, the land is what you got. You've got your sun in different angles to figure out what time it is during the day, to figure out how you're gonna, you know, get your food and how you're going to feed yourselves, how you're going to migrate, what are the temporal patterns going on. You're engaging with the land to gain that knowledge. But with technology, it severs and divides and makes us believe that, you know, it, it it's allowing us to dissipate real images of unity, I find, because what you're discussing, I think it's so great that we are engaging in these dialogues, because it's through talking that we decide that, oh my goodness, this is what's actually happening to us. Like, how do we like remove ourselves more and more from this situation? And I guess it's just imploring each other to just address it in different ways is all I'm saying. It's just, let's come up with new language. I'm saying it, but I'm sitting here with you being like, what do we say? Like, that's what I spend my time doing, is coming up with different language to say the things. But we don't even have the words for some of the stuff in English. So turning to a place like Massey Books, y'all. Okay, let's get some Indig knowledge coming through that's being translated, you know. I know there's lots of work going on in the province for different apps for different nations, being able to relearn their languages. So yes, technology has its, I have qualms with it, but there's some stuff about it that's like, okay, just like, let's redirect our vision to different knowledge bearers. Because if we keep searching to the same ones causing the problems, we're going to be stuck. Other people know other things. We just need to listen to them.
Thank you, Tinthi, for bringing that up. I think I was trying to remember where, but I think what you said really resonated. I recall like a few years ago, chatting with a friend who is, really involved in a lot of collective action, and who thinks really critically against, kind of, building, recognizing and upholding sovereignty for like various communities. And at the time, I don't know how this came into being, but I think we were talking, it was either like anti-capitalism or like, there's a question of like, these terms, these decolonizing, and I can't remember what she'd asked me, but I couldn't quite articulate it. Why I felt this kind of like, again, this like bodily discomfort with what were being proposed as answers to things that we knew were problems. And it was somewhere in the end that Simpson's writings, I was trying to find the passage. I'm not sure if it's from this book, As We Have Always Done, or another one of her texts, where she articulated it really well, and in the way that she writes, talking about how she'd been invited to interview her thoughts around like, how to dismantle capitalism. And for her, she was like, and kind of what resonates with me is that like in building maybe like our plan or actions as oriented against this thing, I think you're totally correct in that like we are granting it power, and it's also lacks an imaginary built on like resurgence or positivity. Because I think what we do then, and it is often a necessary step to kind of armor up against something, but the way that I see it is that I would love for the armoring up to be the last step to handle some perhaps unfinished business, but actually the work is being done in which when we are giving our energy to that what we want, not that is counter to what we see as a problem, but that is in and of itself is something that we want to uphold, we want to visualize and create. And for me that I don't want to create an army that is up against something, but rather build a world that's, I think particularly Leanne Simpson, I think, and many scholars, but many people, as you say, who we encounter in the street and at the bus stop, and kind of everyone in our lives are involved in these aspects of world building, and that those worlds can be multiple, and that maybe they forget the word for capitalism at one point, because they're so busy building a world that you don't need to think about that doesn't seep in. That's hopefully what I want to see and be involved in, but it is a challenge, because I think personally, one of the strengths of colonization and capitalism is that it is often very effective at fracturing where things once were or could be connected. And so kind of building that sense of connection, weaving it into our day-to-day, for me seems like a way forward, perhaps. I'll try to find for this the slideshow that passage where Leanne speaks about this, because I found it, as you said, Tinthi, sometimes we rely on this language to realize perhaps a bit what we're thinking through, and that passage did that for me. So hopefully I'll find it to share with everybody.
Thank you so much for that conversation. We should be speaking about language. We have a book list. We have a room full of book lovers and language lovers. And there's a few good questions that have come up in the chat and in the Q&A. And before we get into those, I thought we could pause and take a moment to come back into our bodies. Here we are in front of a screen. We may have been on a screen all day before arriving here. So this is an exercise that Groundswell, that we do with our classes often. It is a series of self-holds. So we invite you to participate if you like, or take this opportunity if you want to do something more active or move around, move your body a little bit, you can do that. And this is something that we found through Twin Powerment, which is an Instagram account of two twins, two Black women, who do share all sorts of self-holds and self-soothing exercises. We highly recommend that. So we can start, get comfortable if you'll join us in this, and take a few deep breaths. It's going to come into your body a little bit. Don't need to look at the screen. You can just listen to my voice if you can. And we'll start with a side cranial hold. So using your palms of your hand, your whole hand, hold the sides of your head. And whatever pressure feels good for you. You don't have to put too much pressure. Take a few breaths, and especially in this time of social isolation, physical isolation during the pandemic, touch is a basic human need that we can provide ourselves with exercises like this. And now you can shift. Put your left hand on your forehead, your right hand on the back of your head, front to back cranial hold. And relax into feeling of your own embrace. Our heads work so hard these days. It can feel good just to hold ourselves like this. Now you can leave one hand on your forehead and bring your other hand over your heart. Take a breath into this hold, into this position. Feel that care you can give yourself through this sense of touch to your mind, your heart. We might be holding grief, sadness. Bring some care into those spaces of our bodies. And you can leave your hand over your heart and move your other hand to your belly. Anywhere on your belly that feels good. It could be up here over your stomach or down low, holding yourself with care. Be feeling your breath. Take a few minutes here, paying attention to how it feels to be touched right now. And now you can move your lower hand to your solar plexus. So right kind of at the bottom of your rib cage on the front of your body. And your other hand at the base of your head, cradling the base of your head, wrapping your fingers around with whatever pressure feels best for you. You might want to bend your neck from side to side, easing into it. You might want to take a deep breath. Feel your solar plexus rise under your hand. And know that these holds, this self-compassion is there for you whenever you want to tap into it. Focusing on our sense of touch, on the giving and receiving of touch in our own bodies. And as you come out of these holds, take your time. I also wanted to remind everyone of something we learned from Mercedes Baines, who Groundswell has done some, she's essentially our organizational therapist. And she always reminds us in sessions, virtual sessions, to sort of look beyond the screen and kind of get out of that rectangle between our eyeballs and the screen in front of us, and remember that we're in this more expansive space. So looking at, if you're lucky enough to have someone with you, beside you.
By the way, we're in each other's bubble, if anyone was wondering.
Yes, it's COVID safe. Yeah, and just like look down, look up, look into the space that you're in, and remember that there's more to the space that you're in, or if you happen to have a window nearby. So you don't always have to have your eyes glued to the screen during this session. And also a good thing to remember when you're doing other work in front of the computer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
A little refresh.
Yeah. So I think we're going to move into some crowdsourcing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So as we mentioned, we have a open Google slide deck that we're going to share in the chat with you. And we're going to put some music on. We're going to let you go in there and see some of the things that have been pre-populated. So some things from our guests here today, some things from the Groundswell team, and you'll have a chance to take a look and add anything you like to this. So you can add a link, you can upload an image, you can embed a video, and there's the second slide, you'll see some instructions on how to add things to the slides. So feel free, it doesn't have to, look a certain way or anything. You can add in whatever you like, or just sit back and relax and see what people are adding to the slides. So this is also a time to think about some more questions for our guests here today. So when we come back from this little break, little crowdsourcing break, we'll turn it over to some of the questions that have already started coming through, and any other questions that come from the attendees here today. So I'm just going to put on some tunes.
I'll drop the link.
And Samita is dropping the link. You can head over there. You'll find it in the chat. And if you're having any technical difficulties accessing it, just let us know. And enjoy.
See people coming in.
You should be ashamed. Got that shit on your hands. Another man. Take off your badge. We all know it was murder. Show fear, even in my eyes. I will always rise in wildfires. I show fear, even in my eyes. I will always rise in wildfires. I ain't never been scared, even through my tears. I will always care in wildfires. But we will never show fear, even in my eyes. I will always rise in wildfires. I ain't never been scared, even through my tears. I will always care in wildfires.
All right, so we'll take another minute. Adding photos. I see some songs. And thanks for adding all this stuff. Some quotes. Very cool. Yes, we'll come back in just under a minute. And take your time perusing this. We'll be sharing this after the event as well.
Leave in the night. Tell the truth. White lies. Spread lies. You should be ashamed. But bloodshed on your hands. Another man. Take off your badge. We all know it was murder. Murder, murder.
Thanks, everyone. And you have the link there, so you can keep sharing if anything comes up or comes to mind for you. We wanted to ask a question to our panelists from someone that's here tonight. What role, if any, does pleasure play in building collective power? And I'm just one moment here. We lost Nura, I believe. So
Nura will be back.
okay,
Yeah, in a
Cool.
minute.
awesome. Just want to check in.
I'm just gonna say, is this like, just to clarify, in terms of being able to experience pleasure, or what do you mean?
Yeah, I guess I won't speak for this person. But I guess sort of how I took it is, and maybe Michelle can add to it, but how I took it sort of is in doing some of the work of dismantling, it can be very heavy. It's a lot of heavy work. And the alternatives that we're trying to create, of course, they're going to take a lot of work and effort. And a lot of you talked about building relationships and what is the place of joy in that and pleasure in that work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It might, I'll bring in this question that was in the chat as well. It's kind of the flip side of
Okay.
it. So in the chat, Danielle asked that I'd be curious to hear that panelists share what they think about emotional numbness or shame and oppression, the intersection of institutionalized structure that dampen our expression and how that is harmful for this the idea of collective power. So it might be like the other side of the coin. Speaking of like that numbness and lack of expression versus something like pleasure. So yeah, if we can like focus on the pleasure, the building part.
I guess from my perspective, I take my self-care very seriously because I work really, really hard. Like I work so many hours when I work, and not just because, I work in film. So yes, I do work many hours, but prior to like every job I've ever had, I've worked hard because I'm Black, so I have to work harder by default. So I'm very tired all the time. And so I've always made the effort to dedicate a time once a month if I can, or every other month to do something self-care. So I would call it a self-date. I either before the pandemic, I love going to plays and that. So I'd take myself out on a self date for a play. I'd get dressed up for myself and go to the play, and then go out for dinner by myself, and maybe go on a walk after, or dessert, just things that I enjoy. Or I have back problems, so I get massages, and that makes me relax and like reset, because it's really draining to constantly be critically thinking about these things. And it's an everyday experience, it's lived, but also the dismantling, it boggles the brain, it makes you sleepy. So I just try and do activities that make me feel relaxed. I'm also a huge fan of bananas, on and off the record. So sometimes I just eat like, a bunch of bananas, like 4 at once. Boom, there we go. Yes.
We have a bite left.
Yes.
It's actually our pre-facilitation or food, because it's the only thing that calms us.
You see, they're so calming. So yeah, that's what I would say. I take the time to, I in turn feel the numbness in a place that is more silent. That's a way I could respond to that. The noise of the city can often make it worse, like immobilizing. So instead of getting to a point of like the petrification, I take myself outside, perhaps on a walk, so it's just silent and calm. And then I can become centered in that numbness and move it around the chakras to then leave my body if I can.
Thanks, Tinthi, for sharing that. Nura, I'm not sure if you heard that question because you stepped out just for a moment, but the question was, what role, if any, does pleasure play in building collective power? And my mind directly also went to you and Pool, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in talking about that or sharing anything related.
I think that pleasure is, for me, 100% fundamental in being able to sustain work. And I think that there is, something that I started to think about a lot in terms of following you guys' workshop is this idea of productivity that we've all ingested, and this idea that, we have to be doing things that are productive in this very sort of capitalist-driven narrative of productivity, because it's not just productivity, it's productivity that's directly tied to money. and earning money or like the value associated with money, and anything on the other side of that is like frivolous and, you know, self-indulgent. And so I think that, yeah, what we tried to do over the summer when we were doing that residency is really unpack what all of these things mean and how actually that pleasure and the sort of like the artificial divide that we have between our work life and our home and our other outside of our work life is also rather arbitrary and false. How we can start to think about work as being a place that can also hold, you know, ideas about care and ideas about comfort and ideas about pleasure. That work doesn't have to be, especially when it comes to social activism work, that there's this idea that it has to be, you know, you have to be a martyr for it, that it has to take everything from you, that it has to, you know, involve all of these very sort of like self-sacrificial ideas. And I think that for me personally, I don't believe in this idea that, you know, things that are hard are de facto more meaningful or better somehow. And that actually we could be doing all of this work, especially social activism work, in a way that is actually rejuvenating and invigorating and filling up, rather than just a place that just takes everything from you. And I think that this idea that it must take everything from you is still within that narrative of trying to convince a certain structure that denies you of your personhood and value. But actually, if we start to sort of look inwards into our communities, that this whole conversation about trying to convince somebody of something doesn't have to happen, and that we can have different conversations, like same as we were saying earlier, Tinthi, about, you know, thinking about the ways that we use language and about, you know, ideas about white supremacy that locks us into conversations with, you know, supremacy in order to talk about supremacy. That actually, you know, if we kind of just get rid of that altogether and be like, that just takes everything from me and gives me nothing back, that actually our spaces of giving this kind of work can be pleasurable and you know, sustaining in those ways. And so I think that I definitely take self-care and pleasure seriously, and I think that it has to be embedded into any kind of work that is about community. That we need to find spaces that are validating, but also that are enriching. You know, that it's not just about having conversations that are, like you said, like hypercritical and like not critical, but like, you know, mentally rigorous. That we can actually just come together and form sort of like womb-like spaces that are, you know, sustaining, and that be valuable, and that be respected, and that be applauded. That it doesn't have to be seen as frivolous or you know, extenuous. That it actually is like rooted in the core of how we should be together. And so I definitely think about yeah, this idea that pleasure for me is not superfluous, it's not frivolous, it's not self-indulgent. It's actually a necessary ingredient for getting this work done, and also continuing to get this work done. But I think that even for me personally, I think I've become pretty militant about incorporating pleasure into my life as a personal practice, and seeing that as being something that I count as my productivity. That's how I think of myself as being productive, if I've taken time for myself to do these things. And something that I've started doing recently is, in the mornings, I have 1 hour where I don't, the first hour, I don't answer emails, I don't scroll on Instagram, I don't, you know, engage in anything that is officially productive or not wise. And I just take that first hour to read. And I go make myself a coffee, crawl back into bed, and just read for that first hour. And for me, like, reading is something that I find incredibly pleasurable. And it just starts my day off in a different tempo, you know, and it starts my day off without that sort of like franticness that happens when you just wake up and first things first, you start doing work. And so I think that I've seen for myself bodily and emotionally and mentally what kind of a difference that it makes to me when I do take my pleasure seriously. So yeah.
You and I have very similar morning routines, and it is so, I found it, yeah, it has completely like changed how I am in the world just by like dedicating that time to myself and to cuddles with my puppy. Like it's so needed. Yeah, I'm just rereading the question to myself. What role, if any, does pleasure play in building collective power? I think in one sense, it sets the goal of collective power, that everybody is able to experience pleasure personally. Like, I think we need to, like, that's what it's for, is that we have pleasure built through a feeling of love and a feeling of care and a feeling of a future. And each other. So I think it sets the goal, but it's also collective power enables pleasure to be possible sometimes. I'm thinking of what Nick Wayara, who a colleague and like a friend of mine from Indigenous Brilliance, had the pleasure of interviewing Nick, who has a podcast, Seam podcast. I put a screenshot in the shared slideshow already, talking about collective power and self-care. And Nick shared that, you know, I think there's that feeling that like if I don't do this, like things won't get done, but collective power, like, or collective organizing at least, allows you a time away, like an assurance that like other people are there. Like that's like I live in a collective home, and that's when, when we talk about what it is that we do and why we do it, that's a big reason, is that like there's a sense of I am taken care of and being taken care, the kind of reciprocal. And so I think pleasure then collectivity supports and also requires pleasure to be, because otherwise, there's the burnout. And when it's just yourself, then if there's no one there to like hold you or whatever it is that you're doing, and you need to take time away, then like whatever fighting you might be doing might kind of take an end. But with collective organizing, hopefully it means that somebody's still holding whatever it is that you're doing. So that's how I view it, at least.
I just want to side with both of you, and also just throw it out to the audience how important it is to have this, like maybe moving forward after this panel, something that everyone can bring into their lives if they do not spend the first hour of their day to themselves. I implore you, as well as all of us, to do it, because it means so much to my life to actually start the day off with that meditation, my coffee, taking it very chill, and getting centered within myself before starting the day. So just taking those small steps really helps make for a better person throughout the day. And that's what we're looking for. So I just wanted to say that's really important, and I'm glad we're all doing it.
And I also want to prod people to think of, and if there's an impulse not to take rest when it's earned, or it's never earned, like it's a given. Like I think rest is a given. Like it's, it shouldn't be something that we need to advocate for, but that if folks, it's necessary. And I want to implore folks, if there's an impulse not to take it, like ask, well, what doesn't get done if I don't work this hour? And for myself, I work in kind of like administrative roles as part of like my paid work, but there's other forms of work, and ask them, if this isn't getting done but I continue to do it, then are we setting the bar for what we do in a way that's untenable, and how that actually impacts other people? Like in for example, in workplaces, oftentimes, especially in the not-for-profit world, a lot of people don't take their lunch breaks, right? But then if an employee takes a lunch break, which is very much theirs to take, all this, like there's sort of an unwritten standard kind of gets placed. Like there's already a contradiction in which, well, then it's more strategic for the employer to employ someone who's not going to take their lunch break. Like all of a sudden a standard is kind of set. And I think it's, you know, so if taking your morning or maybe your evening time to yourself, if you can't justify doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the rest of us, you know, because then it's just part of what we do, you know.
Yeah, I love that idea that, like, if you're feeling guilty about taking rest for yourself, thinking about that you're taking rest so that everyone else can take a rest too. You know, that we're setting a new expectation of you know, not feeling like you have to burn yourself out in order to feel that you're being productive, or that you're valuable, or that your time is being used well. Yeah, I think that I also do 2 hours at night as well. That I have. I'm trying to become better at moderating my sleep and ensuring that I get an adequate amount of sleep, because I think that was also my problem, is that I would just work all the way into the night and then get very few hours of sleep. And so I have set on my phone that all of my calls get, and I go to bed now at 10 every night mostly, and my phone goes into like sleep mode at 8, because I know that I need 2 hours to be able to like get ready for sleeping. And so even those 2 hours have now become my sort of like assigned downtime and me time too. So in those hours, I will also, because I can't look at the screen, I'll have to also read or write or journal or think, or yeah. So I think that's, for me, it's not only changed how I feel about my day, but it also has, I think actually I feel like I'm working harder than I have ever worked before. So it's not even like taking this time has made me less productive. That if anything, it's actually helped me do more, or have more energy to do all these things, more enthusiasm as well as energy. Because I think that's a big one too. Is it's not just having the energy, it's having the enthusiasm and the emotional capacity to get to a lot of these things. So
yeah, I think you and I have very similar days and very similar pattern. And also, like, I think this is something that I learned while I was a student. I was very much like a little bit of a keener in university, and would like never read anything if it wasn't like directly related to my studies. And every day I was doing something. You know, my family still resents me because, you know, on every time we get together, I would lock myself in a room for like 8 hours and write. And then finally in my last year, I was like, sucks. And so I dedicated one day to, or at least, you know, one day to not doing school related stuff. And I remember one day I felt like I was cheating because I read a book that would just like a friend had gifted me, and they didn't have anything to school. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this during the semester. And it was the book that is like completely, it was another Leanne Simpson book. Like, I'll just be upfront about it. It was Dancing on the Turtle's Back. Yeah. And yeah, it was a book that like completely set kind of a change in tone, and was able to like catalyze a way of like being that I desperately didn't know I needed, but I did. And so I think, yeah, I think I agree very strongly, Nura, with what you're proposing.
but I also think that for me, it's also part and parcel of remembering that we are like multifaceted whole humans. And I also think that there's a part of this, you know, idea of productivity is tied into your work being your total identity, you know, and that what you do defines you as a human, and that's who you are. But actually there's like so many other things that we do and enjoy and sustain us and give us power and purpose. And so I feel like part of this is also recognizing that, you know, yeah, like the books that we read for pleasure really impact the ways that we see the world and the ideas that we have. And so even those are not like wasted time, but they're actually like part and parcel of us, yeah, developing all the sides of ourselves.
Yeah, I think personally I find it the need to like physically turn off like time telling devices at a certain point is really important for that too, because then all the
Uh-oh, we have a frozen screen.
rest of the day is set off on a different time zone, I would say, a time of slow time and future time and no time, which I think is where I want to be. Yeah.
Not gonna lie, that's what I miss about back home is the flow time, well, African time, and just yeah. But things are there's a you win some and you lose some in either setting, so it's not like there's other challenges that you face, so it's not like it's all hunky-dory on one side versus the other.
Wow, I feel like I love how Groundswell conversations we host here at Groundswell seem to always come back to like food, like bananas and rest.
Always.
Always. Basic things. Do you have any questions for each other that we can wrap up our conversation with? We talked about doing that at our dinner party. If not, there's plenty of questions we can we can ask.
Do we have more questions in the chat, or you two have more questions for us?
We do have more questions.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. This one?
Sure.
Okay. We're picking one here. So tell us a story of beautiful collective power in action when you were in it, when you could feel it.
I'll just type that into the chat so you have that for reference.
I think that the only I only remember like the very recent experiences that I've had, but I think that for me the residency that we did that you guys were part of, Pool, was one of those illuminating aha moments for me for what collectivity can be, and what kind of value that I can ascribe to creating spaces that are not based on the paradigms of productivity and capitalism. You know, this idea of a hangout and it just being a place where you gather people that you want to learn from, people that you admire, people that you respect, and having that time together be in and of itself enough without having to sort of like create something together or produce something together or have this sort of like object oriented or event oriented mentality where it can just be about coming together, eating together, and learning from each other, and that holding that space for each other was really, for me, just such a revolutionary idea. It's something that I know, but it's something that I didn't think that was applicable to my work life. That I thought that was something that happens in my social life and my personal life, but that it didn't seem to have a space for it in my work life. And when I did it, it was like, it felt kind of like we were getting away with something because it just felt too good to be true. But it also made me realize that the only reason why I'm not doing it or not in having that as part of my sort of like work life is because I thought that I couldn't, and so I think that was really, for me, a really beautiful moment of realizing collectivity and collective power, and what happens when we take away all of this armature and like sort of like superstructure of capitalist productivity, and just realize that there's other things of value that can happen that are not tied to those structures, that just being around people that you know that you can learn a lot from can in and of itself hold so much value.
Yeah, it makes me think of an artist residency as well that I had the pleasure of doing with two friends who run a gallery called Number 3 Gallery, which is actually a gallery without like a physical site. And yeah, we had just sort of set up like a kitchen table in Access Gallery in Vancouver's Chinatown, and yeah, we went in without any kind of idea to produce anything, and pretty much just had access to a space, which is such a rare feeling in Vancouver, and just hosted meals. And I think yeah, it's been a long time since we've been able to do that. And in that space we also beaded, and today is kind of one of the, I haven't been beading during this whole pandemic, I think because of the the sadness that the pandemic brings, and kind of yeah, just the isolation. But I think in those spaces of being together without without having necessarily anything like a particular goal or action, or actually just really generative spaces, I think the kitchen table is like a political space. And it's a space that I know personally, like lots of rights of mine that are recognized now are because women got around a kitchen table and did so for decades, and how much knowledge is there, and how changed you can move away from such a small and intimate space. So I think when I think of the question of collective power in action, like I think of just doing what maybe we're meant to do, and that's be together, and to share, and that happens at the table.
Yes, yes. Yes, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's like it's the undercommons. When these spaces are not for us, where we do our learning is all of these, the hallways, and outside for a smoke break, or at the kitchen table, or on the dance floor, like all of these other spaces that hold us.
Oh yeah. I would definitely say hands down, Culture Day was that for me within the recent past. It was just magnificent to have people join together, and I'm very much focused on sensory communication in general. Body language is very important to me. So it spoke to that greater force and essence from the being, because people were really speaking through their language, whether it was poetry or music, and DJing and all that, singing. And it was just like that for me, what collective unity really looked like, and that shared space, and everyone able to vocalize in a way that they saw fit, whatever that definition meant to them. So yeah, I definitely side with the kitchen table though I mean, yeah, there's lots that happens there. It's a very dramatic but it's very powerful for sure.
Yeah, because I think that for me also it's like realizing that a lot of these sort of academic or institutional spaces, they just engender such inauthenticity, you know, and so much, I don't know, play acting in a sense. And I feel like when we create these other alternative spaces, it's for me, it's so much richer and so much more, because it's more authentic, that you don't have to, you just almost like, it's like, I describe it like taking off your bra at the end of the day, you know, like you just get home and you're like, you know, and it allows you to be a person first.
Samita's writing that down.
Yeah, I think that should be a tagline for our course. Take off your bra. Relax. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Tinthi, Emily, and Nura. This is such a lovely conversation again after our dinner party, and I think we could probably continue this for hours, and we always have so many more questions and so many ways we could go with it. So we really appreciate you having this conversation with us today, and sharing your perspectives and your experiences. Before we end the night, I just in the share, sorry, in the Google Slides share, I'd shared the book list that Emily created for us. So I'll also put that into the chat. So if you want to do some more readings on building collective power, we've compiled a list here for you all. And if you have any of your own recommendations, please send them through to us. We can get Emily to add those on. And the other thing we want to leave you with is, if you want to continue to be in these types of conversations and unpack, you know, your relationship with work and these systems that we live under, and also talk about alternative ways of being in relationship with yourself and others in your community, we do have a 4-week leadership for social change course that will be starting in June. So we'll also drop the link for that as well. So you can read information on that. And thank you again to all of our attendees for showing up, and my co-host Paula. Yeah, it's just been a lovely night. I wish we could keep going, but we won't take too much more of your time.
Yeah, but we need that rest.
Yes.
Those 2 hours.
Rest.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we'll be playing some music, Nura's recommendations, on our way out as well.
Did you want to say something, Emily?
I wanted to add, I didn't want to come here this evening to plug Massey Books, but because we are talking about collective action, I would just say, and if folks are feeling like there's any books they want to buy, we decided today that any profits made today will be going to support the First Nations opposing Site C Dam. So any book you buy today, you can know that the profit is going towards supporting the Raven Trust, which helps predominantly with advocacy and legal funds for nations kind of across Turtle Island. So just putting that out there. If you're thinking about buying a book today or tomorrow, buy it today.
Honestly, we went by and we bought 4 books. So
Awesome. Oh, you
go
got
buy.
them.
We actually bought 5, but 1 wasn't available, so we were able to pay for it, and we'll pick it up later.
Awesome. Yeah, you've got some of my favorites there. Sea Room Magazine, Islands of Decolonial Love. Yeah, so I just put that out there, and then again, thank you, a huge thank you to the wonderful host this evening, and Tinthi and Nura. So honored to meet you and learn from you both. So thank you.
Yes, I would, you know, parrot that same sentiment, because yeah, I am so grateful for, you know, all the people at Groundswell for holding the space and creating this kind of space for us, and for my 2 wonderful panelists for your wisdom and insight and just generosity. This is exactly what I love. Like everything about this is exactly what I want to have as the majority of my life.
Have more conversations.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And it's been a delight connecting with both you, Nura, and Emily. Just grand. And as well, you know, reconnecting with Paula and Samita. This has been a very insightful conversation, and you know, this kind of dialogue needs to keep up. So yeah, I'm really glad it happened, and we should just push it forward.
Yes. Yeah, this won't be the last conversation like this that we're going to be having. Thank you all so much. It was so lovely to have you here, and yeah, this is not the last time.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. I'm leaving on such a warm, glowy feeling.
Yay!
Oh.
Bye. Thanks for the music.
No worries.
Yeah, it's okay. Oh, because wait, what? No. We did it!
We did it. That should have been on there. I think it's still recording. Yes, it's there. Okay, awesome. We should end that.